So now and again, rather than giving a Dharma talk, we would have a Sunday where people can ask questions. And there have been a lot of questions lately and haven't been able to get to all of them. So hopefully, if there are questions you've been meaning to ask over the past couple months and weren't able to wedge in the question area. Part of that's because I talked too long, and then part of it is that there's a lot of questions. Then now would be a good time just to say something about questions. Also, I meant to mention, if you're sitting in such a way that you can't see me, feel free to move around a bit if that's helpful. You don't have to want to see me. That's fine. But the questions, I think, in any spiritual tradition are very, very important. And sometimes we don't get very good opportunity or very good encouragement or very good instruction about how to ask a question, or maybe more fundamentally just why questions are important. Oftentimes we think that we're going to learn some content, and that content we're just receiving from outside of ourselves, and then we'll use that content to practice or to change the way we're thinking about things or whatever it is, and that's what constitutes learning. There is some part of learning which is that, but it's like a little slice. The much more robust part of learning is learning to follow the questions that we have, not just questions for out there, but questions for in here. And if we take up the discipline of listening to our questions and not just trying to answer them or resolve the questions, they have this capacity to lead us in a really profound way. And that can be difficult in that oftentimes what we're looking for is closure to something, or we want to just know so then we can do it. But this way is asking us to do something that's a little bit different, which is like open the window and let the cool air in and just sit there for a while, right? And feel what it's like for this thing to be open. It doesn't mean that there's no content of thought, but it means that the content of thought is in a process of opening rather than in a process of trying to find a kind of convergent point to land on as understanding. So within the Zen tradition, particularly, questions are really emphasized, and they're emphasized in that spirit that they ask us to do kind of the opposite of what we're cognitively practicing a lot of the time, which is to land on an answer. In that terrain, then, sometimes a question and a response to that question sometimes will seem conceptual. There'll be some kind of an answer that's conceptual you can take in, see how it works with your question you want it. Sometimes, Zen's very famous for answers that are just like, something like that. And you can't deal with it cognitively at all. All you can do is receive the response and see where it goes. These kinds of sessions of question and response tend to lead a little more into the conceptual, and then when we do some other practices, like the practice of shosan, which happens a few times a year, where people come up and ask questions in a more formal setting, tends to go more in the realm of those. But who knows? Depends on what the question is. Oftentimes the succinctness of the question draws out certain quality, but that doesn't mean your question needs to be succinct. And neither do my answers. So what's shaking?
Oh.
Hi.
We recite the invocation, Jiho Sanchi. Would you say something about that?
Sure. So at the end of a sutra chanting, and then we have a dedication of merit, and we'll either recite Jiho Sanshi Ishifu Shison Busa Moko Samoko Hoja Horomi, or we'll recite all Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, Mahaprajna Paramita. Wisdom beyond wisdom, Mahaprajna Paramita. Those are the same words in different language. So the Japanese is the Jiho Sanshi Ishifu, and then the all Buddhas is the translation. That's actually an abbreviated version of the 10 names of the Buddha that we chant like during a meal verse, where we start out with the Vairajana Buddha, pure Dharmakaya, Lochana Buddha, complete Sambhogakaya, which we call the 10 names, but there's actually 11. Isn't tradition wonderful? And so in that one we take all Buddhas, and then all the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas, and then wisdom beyond wisdom. So we take those 3 lines, and then that's an abbreviated way to invoke all of the great beings that guide us on the path. This kind of practice is it's fundamental. You know, like, we're so self-contained, like, I'm going to do it. And especially we come to a meditation practice, it's easy for that to be the message. Okay? Get it together, people. You know, like that's the message. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps in one way or another. But really the practice is not asking us to simply pull ourselves up by our bootstrap. It's asking us to realize that we're receiving things all the time and that we probably need help. And so these kind of invocations are both a thanking of all of those beings, and also a calling in the presence of all those beings to be part of the assembly of our waking up together.
What is that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm very upset
Ooh.
toward my landlady, current landlady. And we were about to move out, everything was going smooth, and then something happened, it just like blew the top off again. And I'm at a place where I just don't, like I was like ready to just let it go, but I realized like I'm not letting it go. And I don't necessarily think that's the move, but I'm just wondering how you think like moving through anger, like a good way of doing that.
Yeah.
Instead of like exploding, which is really tempting, but I'm gonna really try not to.
Try not to. Yeah. We'll have a couple suggestions. Some are practical and some are will be frustrating. So we'll go with the practical ones first. When our oldest daughter Anzu was little, her younger sister Kaide was quite frustrating. And so she was always doing things she's 5 years younger, and she was always doing things to really get underneath Anzu's skin. Anzu's a very patient type person. She's so happy to have a little sister. And she'll just like, try, but you could see the frustration building up. And so what we taught her to do was to go out onto the front patio when we lived here, on the front patio, and scream. And she would do that. She would go out and you'd see her kind of go, and she didn't want to unload on her little sister. She knew that wasn't exactly fair to her, although I encouraged her to unload her on her little sister sometimes. But that's like how she's organized, really. So she would go out and she would yell. And then she'd come back and she would have this like very kind of like, look on her face. And that kind of helped her through. So, I'd encourage you, a little bit of that is helpful. And what I find is to engage the emotion directly rather than trying to be too good about it. Because then what happens is you end up being like, it's like a complain fest about why she's wrong, which isn't the point. Really, just there's emotion, and how do you emote without like attacking her? And there's just that level of emotion. For some people, that's like yelling is good, or breaking things. I knew someone who Alexis, who you've met before. She went to the Smash Room. Where have you guys heard of this? You go pay some money, and then you get to break things. And they have all kinds of things to break. And that was great for her. She said, because she's the kind of person who will always kind of tenderly take care of things. So it was just kind of like permission to break through. Some people exercise. Some people singing. Some people just like, what I do is I go, like I just grunt. I kind of walk around and grunt a little bit. And that's usually helpful to me. So again, the point being just like a direct encounter of the energy of that anger that isn't then hooked onto your righteousness, which is super hard to decouple. And if you try to go for the softer kind of like, well, I'm going to be a good Buddhist sort of way, it's harder to decouple those two. So I'd say that's one level, is just try to, and then when you go to kind of interact with the content of being pissed off at your landlady for something, now you've addressed the you've addressed the emotionality of it, not only within that context. It doesn't mean you won't get angry there, but I bet you'll find that it's really, you're not right on the threshold of unloading on her because you're attending to it other places, you know. And then also I would say, in that same realm of emotion, usually underneath the anger, there's some real fragility. And so that's a different kind of attending. If you can kind of do the groaning in whatever way that's for you is good, you're probably going to feel some sorrow underneath it. And then that sorrow is something that's really important to touch. Because usually in those anger-like situations, there's something underneath it in that realm. And so, you know, relying on your partner, relying on your Sangha, relying on friends and family, and relying on the practice of holding gently in that place is really important. So those are the kind of more, I think, like practical and maybe satisfactory parts. The parts a little bit less satisfactory is like, what is that? What is it? There's a devil in all of us. And it wants to hurt things.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so these things I'm talking about at the beginning are ways to work with it kind of energetically, but I would say that there's that question, what is that? And what is it for that devil to practice? That's a big question. Not just how do I practice to try to kick the devil out or placate the devil or whatever it is. How does that devil actually receive the medicine of the Dharma? That question is more challenging and less satisfying in the sense that it doesn't give us such an answer. But it does allow us to say, oh, okay, actually, I can't kick that devil out. There actually has to be in my practice. That's very energizing, actually. If you can take that anger right directly to the cushion, for example, and say, okay, I'm not booting you out, but I'm gonna this big view of my body and heart that isn't trying to divide it out, and then you can investigate. Ask him a question, or her, I don't know.
So, like on that note, I think that when you go down to that place of hurt, right beneath the anger, it's often grief and hurt. I can get dive into it like too much. Like when you talk about touch versus getting lost in it and wallowing, which is a huge problem of mine. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So anything that is important to us, even if it's something that's difficult, our tendency will be to grasp it, and in the grasping to try to be in a, try to fix things. I think that one where we wallow, we have some kind of story about the importance of doing that, and the cathartic effect probably is true. It probably do feel a kind of something important that comes with catharsis at some points, and that's also important. But our grasping on it, now we've created another kind of thing. Just like when we're floating over top of it, we're trying to stay up here, float over top of it, then we go down in it, and we think, oh, that's the real work. So I think meditation is a great teacher about this, where it's pretty hard to sink into that wallowing if you're paying attention to being upright, whether that's on the ground or a chair or whatever it is, and letting the breath come in and out in a open way. I'm not saying that you can't have a lot of rumination happening during that, but you're in this process of a continual opening of the rumination, as opposed to putting your energy into kind of let me dig deeper. And that's one of the reasons that the instructions for meditation are so simple and so direct. Like, don't make plans. Don't plan that this is what's going to happen in your meditation. And so we can see, even before we go into the meditation, we might be laying these kind of mousetraps for our deep feelings or something. And that's a good thing to pay attention to. And then not to force the meditation. Like a lot of people will think like, well, yeah, now I'm going to really meditate now. I'm going to fix everything. Or you've heard me say, don't fix it a bunch of times. I'm not fixing it. No, I'm not fixing it. I'm just really going into it. But really you're trying to, you think that this is the project that will make everything better. And it is in a sense, but the process of that is a process of touching, not grabbing. And in that way, an image we can hold is the lotus flower. So the lotus flower, that's a very important image in Buddhism, and one of the reasons is because the place it grows is like the grossest thing you've ever seen. It's like really swampy, stinky, rotting stuff. And then these lotus flowers come up out of that. Sometimes I saw one that was blooming under.
Oh, wow.
It was really amazing. Or sometimes they'll bloom right under and then they'll kind of lift up, but they're very waxy, so all of this material falls off of them very easily. But of course the flower is very beautiful and calls our attention, but it's based in the mud. So the mud is important, but the mud and the flower, we try not to separate them. That's really the practice of meditation, for example, or other Buddhist practices, is not to separate those two. That's another direction.
Roger-san?
Uh-huh.
So when we were talking about anger and the various ways or expression,
Yeah.
so inside of oneself, so there is also passive-aggressive behavior, which is often the result of anger not being, or no permission within the self to express anger directly. And it seems to me that is the most difficult for the individual to suss out in themselves.
Yeah.
Because I always think that a first step in anger is to see what's happening here around that anger. But passive-aggressive behavior, I think, causes a lot of trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Because, so how do you see that?
I agree, 100%. It causes a lot of problem, and a lot of it's not awareness. But I think a lot of it is emotional immaturity.
So as we get older, perhaps?
Some people stay pretty immature. I mean, maturity doesn't necessarily come with age.
I know.
But I think that what I mean by emotional immaturity is that emotions are just something to either indulge or resist. And that's a very kind of low level way of working with them. So that kind of passive aggressive is usually, like you're saying, my experience is it's a kind of resistance, and then that's not Esho's problem.
No.
You're like the least passive aggressive person I know, maybe. Just straight up aggression. Yeah.
I have another
Yeah.
sort of, not exactly, can I do a little bit more?
Sure.
So when we speak about grasping, when there's a problem,
Yeah.
and the grasping on, which is not useful, so how do we distinguish, because sometimes it's really critical to take action,
Oh, yeah.
and to discern that, to sort of how to discern that within oneself, because some of us have more tendency to take something seriously and ruminate than others.
Yeah.
So I think that's really an important distinction.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Maybe-
Passivity isn't the point.
what?
Passivity isn't the point.
Right.
And so sometimes we misunderstand the teachings of Buddhism as kind of like, I'll say, like, just chillax and everything will be okay.
Right.
That's not what the teachings are. The teachings are, if you go into difficulty, whether that's external or internal, really that distinction's a little bit not so true, but we experience it that way a little bit. Sometimes it feels like something's happening outside we need to tend to, something inside. That the teaching isn't just wait and it will be okay. But the teaching is also, when we are grasping, we're using the fundamental quality of the problem itself to try to fix the problem. And then you're in a karmic cycle that just reinforces itself. So again, if we go back to the image of touching and rather than grasping, if we're looking to take action, to take the action by opening our hand rather than closing it. And that can be very, very difficult, especially when the situation is acute and hard. But if you can open your hand, this is all kind of symbolic, but if you can open your hand, now you can function. If you've grasped on the solution or the problem, and it's just trying to nail down the problem, and then your hand doesn't function. So you can't really do things. So the same thing with your heart, same thing with your intention. If you simply clamp down, then really that makes you the least effective. And to respond to some difficulty or problem, what we want to learn to do is to say, it takes a lot of humility, and then it takes a lot of gumption. Like, I really don't know. And that doesn't mean I'm going to just hope it goes away, or I'm going to just leave because I don't think I'm the person. I can stay present and then but it's very, very tricky, and it takes nothing for us to then be like, oh, I'm going to fix this, or oh, I can't do anything about it, I'm too weak. That will fall into that pattern in an instant. So that's why our deeper intimacy with those patterns is important.
Thank you.
Well, just
Was it? Yeah.
this is helping me a lot. I have a coworker who is a client unhoused in Eugene who is having a mental health crisis. Was devolving by the day, and different times went and sat with and helped her back into a place of safety. And it was a watching and waiting kind of situation. The hope was that the meds would kick in and spare her a trip with the hoop. And I literally spent an hour on Thursday with trying to text my boss, trying to figure out what to do. And every time I overruled even the texting, I just stayed. I knew multiple eyes were on her. We were making sure she didn't get lost. And in the end, he made the call for help, and she is probably in a center right now getting assistance. The pain of not acting is still kind of overwhelming, if that makes sense. I was doing my best to be an unknowing, because I was. I was bearing witness, and the loving action seemed to be to take no action, but to watch and wait. So just to say this is assisting, because there's a great pain in not acting.
To be present, to simply be present, and not be able to do anything, not know how to do anything, is extremely painful, and necessary. The place where we try to skip over the difficulty or the pain of it to get to the solution because we can't deal with the pain of it, that's where we make big screw ups. And so your generosity of being there with this person could also, it sounds to me, like lay the groundwork for the person who needed to make the call when they did that. And it takes a whole network of causes and conditions, many of which are usually people, to be able to make that happen. And that's, I think, a real, is hard. And one of my favorite paintings of Hakuin Zenji, who is a very famous Japanese Zen master, is of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva that's here to the Buddha's right. And it was a common motif of his paintings to paint Avalokiteshvara, among many things, but we paint her. And there's one I always remember. She's in the kind of one of the heavenly realms, and she's looking down, which is what Avalokiteshvara means, the Lord of the one who looks down upon the world. And she's like, she's just like, and like kind of look, like one eye sort of looking down, and she's like, oh. And then the inscription says, "Wouldn't you be a little worn out too?" And No, this was the magic of Hakuin's brushwork and willingness to, write these kinds of things, because oftentimes we'll get a hardened sense about what it means to be a bodhisattva. Even the great bodhisattvas are weeping. Or we could say that maybe what we could regard as a great bodhisattva is these beings who never quit weeping. That the sorrow of the world to them is not a barrier to living. The sorrow of the world is the very foundation of what their life is about. And it doesn't stand in opposition to joy, that they can have both of those there. So we can learn that, and our own difficulty with it's really important. All manner of praise for cahoots.
For this one?
Mm-hmm.
You're describing this expansive way of pursuing our questions.
Yeah.
And discouraging us from, trying too hard to resolve things.
Yeah.
There are certain moments in life that call for decisions where things
Yeah.
contract, and there has to be a summary of
Yeah.
all of the expansion.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you can speak to this pathway. How does one arrive
Yeah.
there? And how does
So these two things go together really well. You decide. But you decide with a full recognition that your decision is provisional. Your decision is, we don't have the capacity to see all of the causes and conditions to make the right decision. But I will make a decision within the context when I need to. And that's what this openness allows. It's not an openness which means that I'm abdicating responsibility or not making decisions about things. It means, well, actually, when I make a decision, that's on me. But we spend so much energy trying to get the responsibility outside of ourselves by understanding completely. But we can't understand completely. So but oftentimes our attempt there is to kind of get out of the responsibility. Like, I didn't make the decision, I just did what was right. It was like, no, you made the decision. You tried to make the best decision you could. You tried to make the right decision. And almost any decision, or I would say probably every decision we ever make, has a certain quality of rightness and a certain quality of wrongness. And we got to be willing to take it both. We don't get to just be right. And so that expansiveness allows us then in that decision making to take a different kind of stance. That we know that there's going to be action and there's going to be reaction, and we have to take that into consideration. So we can be very detailed in our analysis, but then when it's time to move, we have to move according to what we see, and we may be wrong, and we might make a big mistake, but that's the courage that's necessary for life. So the expansiveness, I wouldn't think so much about it as being like letting go of ever making decisions. It's just like opening up the windows and realizing, okay, now what am I going to cook for dinner? I just have to decide. That's all. I mean, it's going to depend on a lot of things. What ingredients are available? What am I hungry for? Or what is my wife hungry for? Whatever. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about the role of prayer in Zen Buddhism?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for a lot of people, the word prayer is loaded in positive, negative, different kinds of ways. And so I like to use the word because I think it points to a certain kind of way of being and an activity that is really central to spiritual life. But I also realize that for a lot of people, the way that they can reference prayer is a kind of idea that I am going to speak with, maybe plead with, maybe ask for, or from an all-powerful creator being, something. That's kind of the foundation of where prayer happens. Now, so for some people that's positive. And for other people, there's a lot that's negative in that for them. So that's not what I'm talking about when I talk about prayer in a Buddhist sense. because there is no creator, all-powerful creator deity to start with. And then even like there are some that are kind of nudge in that direction, but in Buddhism in general, we don't see them as being the goal of our spiritual practice. They're not so different than the people you're with or other things. They're super powerful, so don't want to take them off, and you might need their help. But that's like asking help from your friend or asking help from another being. It's not supplication. I'm making kind of a neat picture here that's probably a little bit too neat, but basically speaking, the supplication we reserve for these beings who are not, their greatness is not based in power. So we don't pray to Avalokitesvara because Avalokitesvara is powerful. We pray to Avalokitesvara because Avalokitesvara is awakened, and is awakened to the deep suffering of the world. And because of that, she can respond with skillful means. Skillful means are not power. They're the capacity to help turn things through a kind of Dharma medicine. So those beings are all beings, in a sense we can say they're powerful, but they're not powerful in the sense that they have dominion over us or over things. They have insight into the central axis of being. And from that place they can offer medicine that helps life turn. So when we pray to those beings, we're not asking for the favor based on their power or their riches or anything. We're asking for that. We're asking for that assistance of the skillful means. And so it can be a kind of supplication. I mean, a kind of like please help me. That's there, you know. Some Buddhists really really ask for some people who like to, there's certain kind of chants, and in their denominations they like to ask for things like cool cars. Seems to work. I don't know exactly what the expedient mean is there, but that's not for me to know. Right? I'm kind of making a joke about that, but just to say that actually I think we're a little too, most of us in the Western Buddhism especially are like a little too timid. We're a little too like, oh, that's not worthy of my asking for. But I think, I think there's a lot better things to have than a cool car. So, and the best things are things you can't have. You know, so our prayer can go into those places. So that's a kind of prayer when we're in that kind of appeal, a prayer as an appeal. And then there's prayer as a more of a contemplative prayer, which is more like a meditation, where we're not making an appeal, but we are asking for the presence of those beings. We're receiving the presence of those beings, and in meditation, for example, we're receiving the body of the Buddha as our body, receiving the mind of the Buddha as our mind, receiving the breath of the Buddha as our breath. And that is a kind of prayer. So I'm fond of saying, I would prefer, rather than saying meditation, I would say we promote and teach whole body prayer. Like a whole body and heart and mind prayer, that wholehearted kind of prayer, which is a little different than a kind of meditative process, which is also good, but oftentimes, you know, we come back to that more holistic notion. Mm-hmm. And you can pray. It's super easy. Like one of the things that's great in Buddhism is, and maybe I think this is great because I grew up Catholic. There's just things to do, like get a mala, learn the mantra of the Bodhisattva that is resonant with you, and just say the mantra over and over. Not because you're going to get some particular state out of it, or you're going to feel a certain way, or any of that kind of thing. Just appeal. I used to always wear mala when I was teaching school. Every time I go to a staff meeting, it's regarder of the cries of the world, the listener to the world, Avalokitesvara, and just over and over and over and over. Because they go on for a long time. And, you know, and there's important things you need to listen to, but there's a lot of stuff you don't. So that's just like very straightforward, and we don't have to be too precious about it. Although there are times where it does become very precious. Mm-hmm.
My son just started kindergarten, and I've been coming here for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been thinking a lot about kindergarten. Okay, got 13 years of this system. But actually, my question is more about 13 years here in the temple. What is the place for children here?
Mm-hmm.
There's that is a question that I've been asking, the community's been asking for a long time, and we're seriously behind on coming up with an adequate answer. I'm seriously behind on coming up with an adequate answer. There are some answers that seem like they would be adequate, but they don't actually hit the mark. And one of them would be some version of, well, if you go to church, everything works. They have Sunday school program, and the kids just go to Sunday school program, and everybody's in the mass, and they get done, and you have donuts and coffee, and it's wonderful. Like that answer, which holds a part of a truth, I think. But one of the big challenges is we don't live in a Buddhist culture, and we don't really have Buddhist community. We're doing a lot of work to make a Buddhist community. And so what does it mean for families to be involved in the temple in the same way, or maybe not in the same way, but in a way that makes sense within the environment that we're in? There's a lot that we lack in that terrain compared to like I said, I grew up in a Catholic church for whatever, and even though my parents were like, yeah, we're Catholic, I guess. But we go to mass, and then you sort of, well, it kind of works, because the family goes together, and there's that kind of feeling. We don't have that same kind of sense of community. So how do we build it? So for a long time, we've been like, let's make it so someone can watch the kids while the parents practice and study. And it's not enough. And what we found with older children is that they really get, it becomes not great for them. They're sort of like get lugged along so someone can watch them. And I think they basically feel that. So some of the discussions now in the visioning process are about what would it really mean to have a way in which families or parts of families are invited in a together type of way to be more planfully part of the community. But I don't have an answer. I'm sorry. Let me see one other thing that just sort of, one of the other complications is that it's not correct to try to just teach kids to meditate. And some places they're really doing that, well, we just have a little meditation for the kids, which is okay on a certain level. But there is an idea, there's developmental places that are important in that process and is different for different kids. And so I think that's another place where the balance is tricky, because a lot of times parents are coming because they want a serious meditation practice, and then how they're working with that meditation practice. It's not so evident how a kid just fits into that. Like when I go to mass, the priest did that on my forehead. It was great. And then it was time for me to receive communion. I received communion. It takes less than a second to receive communion. It takes 40 minutes to sit a period of zazen, or 20 minutes, a 20-minute period of zazen. And so that there are some practical things that are difficult too.
Mm-hmm. I'm new here. Mm-hmm. I feel very comfortable and welcome. Thank you very much. Here at the invitation of Leah Fisher. So she's a friend of my daughter. So my question is very fundamental. I grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
My wife and I distanced ourselves from the church for many years. My wife of 50 years passed away recently.
Sorry.
So I am on this personal God quest.
Yeah.
And I have asked some of my Catholic Christian friends the simple question, why Jesus? So I'm asking here, why Buddha?
Buddha has never said, or really Buddhas have never said, that there is no way to salvation except through me. And so the reason for Buddha is not because there are no other paths or no other teachers. The reason for Buddha is if we feel that resonance, or we feel that something is speaking to us through the Buddhist tradition or through Buddhist teachings, Buddhist iconography, really anything, then the Buddha just invites us to take a step towards that thing and see if that resonance is important to us. And that's how the path emerges, as opposed to a kind of externally defined path that we would say everyone, should take. So I would say really the question is, I think it's a beautiful question, and it's particularly a beautiful question for you to hold, because it allows you then to listen. Like, in what ways does Jesus speak to me? In what ways does Buddha speak to me? In what way does the earth speak to me in this time of transition and your own spiritual quest? I find that particularly in times of loss, we have a capacity for this that's much higher than other times. And so, you're really at an important place where that listening will bear fruit. And it might draw you closer to your original roots within Catholicism, or it might draw you closer to something else. And from the Buddhist tradition, we acknowledge that's important, and it's not just one thing. We do have some really arrogant teachings about that too, which are sort of like basically like, well, Jesus was basically a bodhisattva, but if he told everybody or so there are sometimes explanations that come like that, which I happen to agree with a lot of them, but I'm also Buddhist. So I just say that as a kind of joke, but there's a kind of wide spirit around it, and a kind of faith, I'd say, within this tradition, that people really, the truth's not located outside of you. And it's also not located inside of you. The truth isn't located. And so because it's not located, the opening of this intuitive encounter with teachings, with the world, that's where a path comes from, rather than there's something outside that I better adhere to or pay attention to, or else I'm going to be in trouble. It's more subtle and in some ways gentler, but in other ways much harder, because we don't just get to kind of, okay, I've been sitting every day for 30 minutes. Why isn't this working? Yeah, it calls for something else. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this actually isn't a question, but I was involved with Dharma Rain for many years with their children's program, and I'm practicing long enough and still in touch with Dharma Rain to have watched these children grow up and make different choices. And actually, I have offered a number of times, I've tried to do a few things for the children's program, and so far it hasn't gelled. But I would say that it added a deeper dimension to a child's choice growing up, the program itself, coming each week, and then also for children to know, and that was, many children expressed this, that they could be themselves, and what that felt like. And I found that that would add something important, because children make very many different decisions as they grow up. Some of our Dharma schools students are now in their 30s and 40s. So, but that ability to know that that's available, would seem to me important, as you're growing up and going out into the world. So I just wanted to say that for you and for Ian. I'm glad he's in kindergarten. So. So.
Thank you.
I'll just have. I'm hoping you could talk about suicide. I live in a really small community, and it's been rocked by young adults committing suicide. I have children, and it feels like really scary to imagine that something could kind of like come out so out of the blue, or like what my perception is that it's very shocking when that happens. So I'm just hoping you could talk to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tragedy, and we're not paying attention to it nearly to the degree we need to. If you just look at the statistical increase in suicide in the past 15 years, is mind-blowing. And there's lots of things that could be said about that, lots of things that could be done, should be done, but maybe this morning I would just point at one thing, and I think as a parent this is a really important facet. We live in a time now where the destruction of meaning and a nihilistic viewpoint about humanity and our place in this world is rampant. And that destruction of meaning is, in my opinion, one of the foundations, if not the foundational reason for this epidemic. And so as a parent, it doesn't mean we have to know everything or have everything nailed down in terms of meaning, but to be able to speak positively about a human life, to be able to talk about the importance of a connection with others. And even though we are afraid of the many problems that humans are creating in the world, to not give in to the constant easy banter about humans being horrible, and that humans are the ones that are going to destroy the planet. Therefore, if humans just weren't here, maybe it would be better. All of that kind of talking, especially around climate change, is toxic. And it's not, yes, we need to do stuff about climate change, but that toxicity is creating another problem, and that problem is it's related to this whole problem of the destruction of meaning in people's lives. We don't have centers of value that we return to again and again and again. Without centers of value that we return to again and again and again, we become hopeless. So those centers of value, like within a family, for example, is how do we come back to each other again and again and again? And sometimes your kids don't want to do that. They're like, I want to hang out with mom. There's other possibilities here, right? But you insist. And you don't just insist by bribing them or forcing them. You insist by you holding that center of value as sacred. And you come back to that again and again. And that can be a lot of different things. But I'd say, my wife and I's raising of our kids, eating was a really important element of that. Going and doing things together, very simple things. Not I'm going to go do something that we're going to Disneyland. Not that. It's like, we're going to go walk in the woods. And I'm going to point out to you how I am totally enlivened by the fact of this world, by just being together. And that's my responsibility as a parent, is to show, like, look at the frog. All the little things. And then as they get older, to talk about big ideas. When they ask about God or they ask about other things, take their questions seriously. And your own center of value, then as you speak into that, creates an opportunity for a heart to be in touch in a way that a lot of times is impossible. Now, there are different reasons people may be suicidal, but this one that really comes from kind of existential despair, I think that's the one, that's the work to do. Stuff that comes from other kind of mental illness that is, sometimes is very hereditary, other kind of places, that will also be helpful for that. But in this case, I think that's kind of the number one thing.